Welcome back to Cozy Club Stories. Tonight we will be reading another relaxing, dark fantasy-inspired story, The Whispering Wood. I hope you're all tucked away, ready to get lost in this magical adventure. On the edge of the Grimglen Moors, where the land faded into mist and memory, sat a crooked little cottage with a crooked little chimney. Smoke always curled from it, no matter the season. Villagers whispered that the house belonged to a witch, or perhaps a wise woman, depending on who you asked, and how recently they'd been helped or hexed. Inside that cottage, a young woman named Mairead lived alone, or mostly alone. Her cat, Vesper, had 3 eyes and sometimes spoke in riddles, but Mairead found her comforting. The cottage was filled with warm light and shelves of old books, dried herbs, and small stones that hummed when touched. It was, in every sense, a place of safety, until the letter arrived. It came by wind, slipping down the chimney and landing in the hearth, untouched by flame. Mairead found it while tending to the morning fire, nestled between embers that refused to burn it. The envelope was sealed in black wax, stamped with a mark she hadn't seen since she was a child. A crescent moon cradled in the branches of a thorn tree. She opened it slowly. Mairead of Grimglen, your time has come. The whispering wood wakes again. The lanterns have gone dark. The voices are stirring. We ask for your aid. Return to Elderholt before the next moonrise. There was no signature, but she knew who had written it, and she knew what it meant. The path to Elderholt was one Mairead had sworn never to walk again. Not since the day her parents disappeared within the borders of the Whispering Wood. But when the forest calls, you listen. She packed lightly, a satchel with vials of starlight, her mother's silver knife, a notebook, and Vesper, who insisted on coming. The cat perched on her shoulder as they stepped beyond the garden gate, the air already thick with that strange, humming quiet that only dark magic carried. The road was not empty. Shadowy figures passed her by without sound, faded knights in cracked armor, children with eyes like mirrors, a woman who cried but had no mouth. All illusions, she told herself. The forest loved fear. It fed on it. But she didn't flinch. She kept walking. By dusk, she reached the gates of Elderholt, a town cradled in a veil of brambles and forgotten stories. Its walls were moss-covered and its towers crooked, but the lights still burned in the windows. Something in her heart eased. As she entered, the townsfolk watched her with a mix of relief and unease. She was remembered, and remembered things in Elderholt often came with a price. Waiting for her at the edge of the square was an old man with eyes like polished bone. You came, he said. Mairead nodded. Tell me what's happened. The lanterns of the Whispering Wood had gone out, and something inside it was awake again. The old man led her to the gathering hall, a place that smelled of smoke, wax, and old wood. There a circle of elders sat, their faces lit by guttering candles. Mairead recognized some of them, aged versions of the people she'd known as a child. Others were strangers, but all wore the same expression, wary hope. The forest sleeps no longer, the old man said. and neither can we. They told her of the lanterns, sacred beacons hung through the whispering wood to keep the night at bay and silence the whispers. For generations, they had been kept lit by the Flamebearer, a title once held by Mairead's mother. Now, the lights were going out, one by one, and with each extinguished flame, the shadows grew bolder. "You are her daughter," one woman said, her voice shaking. "The last of the line. You must take up the flame." Mairead felt the weight settle on her shoulders, heavier than any pack. But she didn't flinch. She had come to help, and she would begin at dawn. The next morning, Mairead stood at the forest's edge. In her hand, she held the Flamebearer's lantern, a wrought iron cage wrapped in vines, its core a softly glowing flame that pulsed like a heartbeat. Vesper leapt to her shoulder, purring. "The trees remember you," the cat said, "but they are not all friendly." Mairead nodded and stepped into the trees. The whispering wood was just as she remembered, dark, deep, and alive in ways no ordinary forest should be. The trees bent slightly as she passed, leaves rustling without wind. Whispers curled in her ears, just beyond comprehension. Memories, warnings, lies. It was impossible to say. As they ventured deeper, the light dimmed, and the flame in her lantern grew warmer. She found the first extinguished lantern hanging limp from a yew branch, its glass cracked. She reached out, and her flame leapt from her lantern to the broken one, mending it as it lit. And for a moment, the whispers paused. They walked all day, lighting lanterns, retracing her mother's path. Each flame she rekindled chased back a little of the darkness, though it never vanished entirely. The wood pressed close, curious and cautious. By nightfall, they reached a hollow path, a sunken trail between two ridges lined with blackthorn trees. Here, the whispering turned from murmurs to words. "Why have you come?" the wind asked. "This is not your place anymore," whispered the roots. "Go back," urged a voice that sounded like her mother's. Mairead clutched her lantern tightly and pressed on. Fear was the forest's weapon, but she had her own: light, memory, and will. Halfway down the path, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was tall, cloaked, and faceless, but familiar. "You carry her light," it said. Mairead lifted the lantern high. "And I will carry it farther." The path opened into deeper darkness, and they continued on. The forest deepened into silence as Mairead crossed into a glen ringed with willow trees. Their long, silvered branches hung low, brushing the mossy ground like fingers dragging through water. In the center of the glen stood a stone pedestal, and on it a broken lantern, the flame long gone, the glass clouded with age. "This place watches," Vesper murmured. His eyes, yes, even the third one, narrowed. "We must tread carefully." Mairead stepped forward, placing her lantern beside the broken one. The flame inside shimmered, then flickered sideways, as if drawn by invisible breath. It reached for the broken lantern. The pedestal groaned. From the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes appeared. Then another, and another. 3 watchers emerged, forest spirits in the shape of great deer. Their antlers hung with bells that rang without sound. Their bodies shimmered with bark and moss. One stepped forward, dipping its antlers low. "You carry the old flame," it said in a voice that echoed like wind in hollow logs. "I do," Mairead replied, steady. "Then you must bear its memory." The spirits turned, their forms dissipating into pale light. The broken lantern shuddered, and the flame leapt into it. It burned again, warmer, golden, bright. The glen exhaled, and the trees stood straighter. Beyond the glen, the forest narrowed. Trees grew close together, bark pale as bone. Their branches twisted into shapes that almost resembled faces. At the end of the path stood a gate made of living thorns, shifting and whispering with a sound like rustling parchment. "This is the boundary," said Vesper. "The forest's heart lies beyond." Mairead raised the lantern. The light pulsed, and the thorns writhed. Then, slowly, they parted. She stepped through. The air grew heavier, filled with memory and sorrow. Here the forest was thick with ancient power. Lanterns hung like stars in the trees, some lit, some dark, some shattered. Mairead felt them calling to her, 1,000 voices murmuring in her blood. At the center stood a hollow tree, blackened and burned, yet alive. A lantern hung from one of its branches, dark as pitch. Mairead approached. She held her breath and reached for the last flame. Beyond the glen, the forest narrowed. Trees grew close together, bark pale as bone. Their branches twisted into shapes that almost resembled faces. At the end of the path stood a gate made of living thorns, shifting and whispering with a sound like rustling parchment. "This is the boundary," said Vesper. "The forest's heart lies beyond." Mairead raised the lantern. The light pulsed, and the thorns writhed. Then, slowly, they parted. She stepped through, and the gate sealed behind her. The air grew heavier, filled with memory and sorrow. Here, the forest was thick with ancient power. Lanterns hung like stars in the trees, some lit, some dark, some shattered. Mairead felt them calling to her, 1,000 voices murmuring in her blood. At the center stood a hollow tree, blackened and burned, yet alive. A lantern hung from one of its branches, dark as pitch. Mairead approached. She held her breath and reached for the last flame. As her fingers brushed the cold lantern, a shock of memory surged through her. She was a child again, holding her mother's hand under a canopy of gold leaves. The forest had been different then, gentler. The lanterns were all alight, and the air had smelled of cedar and lavender. Then the scream. Then the fire. Then the dark. Mairead gasped. The lantern in her hand sparked to life, its flame a deep violet, trembling but strong. Around her, the forest held its breath. "This was the first," Vesper whispered, "and the last." The lantern's light spread, weaving through the roots of the hollow tree, threading into the earth. Mairead saw them, Ghosts of Flamebearers passed, standing in silence, their faces serene. "You have done what we could not," they said, as one. "You have rekindled the heart." The forest groaned like an old ship, and then it began to sing. The final flame sparked a cascade. All across the forest, the once dark lanterns flickered to life, one by one, in echo of Mairead's act. Light rippled along the ancient paths, reawakening forgotten wards and old symbols carved into stone. The forest, no longer looming and lifeless, shimmered with cautious wonder. Vesper leapt from her shoulder to the mossy ground. "They remember," he said, "and they are grateful." The whispering wood had not been conquered, it had been healed. Mairead walked back the way she came, retracing her journey under the rekindled lanterns. Where there had been illusions, there were now visions, truthful echoes from the past. The faceless figure bowed as she passed. The watchers blinked once from the glen's edge. At the edge of the forest, just before she crossed back into Elderholt, Mairead paused. A single flower bloomed at her feet, pale gold, like the flame. She picked it, tucked it behind her ear, and walked on. Mairead crossed the forest's edge beneath the soft light of dawn. Elderholt was waking, its crooked chimneys breathing out curls of wood smoke. The village square washed in gold. No bells rang, no trumpets greeted her return. But as she stepped onto the cobbled road, doors opened, one by one. Children ran barefoot from their homes, gathering around her in wide-eyed awe. Their parents watched in silence, some smiling, some weeping, as the light of her lantern flickered gently in the morning air. The old man with eyes like polished bone met her at the fountain, just as he had when she arrived. But this time he bowed low. "You've brought the flame home." "I lit what had gone out," Mairead replied. "The forest remembers. It will rest for now." They led her to the town hall, now hung with lanterns of its own. As she passed through the square, townsfolk reached out, not to question her, but to touch the edge of her cloak or offer her a flower, a nod, a whisper of thanks. Inside the hall, a room had been prepared for her. The same chamber her mother once used, long ago. Its walls were lined with old scrolls and maps of the forest paths. A fireplace crackled softly. A warm bed waited, turned down and simple. Vesper leapt onto the windowsill and yawned, curling into the sunlight. "You've earned your rest, keeper of the flame," the old man said. "When the time comes again, the forest will call, but not tonight." Mairead set the lantern on the mantle. Its flame danced, calm and steady. The days that followed passed in a dreamlike hush. Elderholt had not known peace for many seasons. The people moved gently now, as if afraid to wake something still slumbering. But the light from the forest edge glowed each night, a golden thread along the trees, reassuring them all that the darkness was at bay. Mairead spent her mornings tending the flame in the town square. A new lantern had been placed on the fountain's edge, crafted from silverwood and rune glass, and it burned with the same warm heart as the ones in the whispering wood. Children called it the keeper's lantern. She taught the villagers how to make simple lantern wards, how to hang charms above their door frames, how to whisper the lighting words, how to listen when the woods murmured. Not all listened, but enough did. The forest would not take them by surprise again. At night, Mairead sat by the fireplace with Vesper curled in her lap, flipping through her mother's old journal. The entries were sparse, but full of love. Drawings of lanterns and forest glades, pressed flowers, names of watchful spirits. She added her own notes beside them. New paths discovered. The Watcher's Glen. The faceless one who had not stopped her. But one page remained blank. The last one. No one had written there. Not even her mother. Mairead stared at it for a long while. Then she dipped her quill in ink and began to write. The flame is lit again, and I remember her, and now they will remember me. It was a week before the first shadow returned, not from the forest, but from within the village. A child, Ewan, had wandered too close to the wood after dusk, chasing a firefly. He returned pale and trembling, unable to speak, a black smudge on the hem of his tunic that wouldn't wash away. The town's healer couldn't explain it, nor could the elder. But Mairead recognized it, the mark of an unlit hollow. Places in the forest where no flame had ever been kindled. Dark wells in the tapestry of light. Places where memory never settled and whispers grew unchecked. Her mother had warned her once, when she was very small, never to follow the fireflies near the roots. They're not always fireflies, she'd said. Mairead took up her lantern. I'm going, she said, before anyone could protest. The old man tried. The flame burns bright now. Must you walk again so soon? But she was already moving. Vesper leapt down from the table, tail twitching. We won't be gone long, the cat said, if we're lucky. The villagers watched her go with the same silence they had when she first arrived. But now it was laced with hope. At the forest's edge, the lanterns glowed in welcome. But deeper in, past the thorn gate, the light began to falter. There, where the hollows waited, the forest did not sigh. It listened, and Mairead stepped into the dark that had never been lit. The deeper Mairead ventured into the unlit hollow, the quieter the world became. No birds, no breeze. Only the sound of her boots pressing into soil that felt too soft, too silent. Even the lantern's glow seemed muffled, dimmed by the oppressive air. This place did not want light. It had never known it. And then, movement. Shapes drifted between the trees. Slender, wrong. Their limbs too long, their heads cocked at odd angles, as if listening to something Mairead could not hear. They made no sound, but their presence carried a pressure, like a storm about to break. Vesper hissed softly, fur rising. The rootless, he whispered. Fragments of memory that never found soil. Spirits without stories. They hunger for light because they have none of their own. Mairead held her lantern higher, the flame within flickering nerve. You do not belong here, it rasped. I'm not leaving until the hollow is lit, she said firmly. The creature tilted its head. Why light a place that wishes to be forgotten? Mairead stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Because forgetting invites rot, and even shadows deserve to be remembered. She set the lantern down at the center of the hollow and drew from her satchel a vial of starnight, one of her mother's oldest tools. With a single drop on the lantern's wick, the flame flared. White gold light poured outward. Dot. The rootless wailed, not in pain, but in mourning. Their shapes twisted, faded, and then resolved. Where once stood shadowy figures, now were flickering outlines of people. Faces Mairead didn't recognize, but felt she'd always known. Forgotten villagers, lost wanderers, echoes. The hollow sighed, and the lantern burned steady. With the hollow of the rootless now behind her, Mairead followed a newly lit trail of lanterns that wound along the cliffs above Elderholt. These lanterns were unlike the others, intricate, gilded with patterns of moon and fawn. Each was a work of art, a story suspended in glass and flame. The trail ended at a forgotten structure, a crooked tower leaning into the sky like a tired sentinel. Ivy clung to its walls, and a single rusted bell hung from a frame above the door. This was the Lantern Maker's Tower, spoken of only in nursery rhymes, where the first flame was said to have been forged from moonfire and memory. It's real, Mairead whispered. ... Vesper narrowed his 3 eyes. Something waits inside. Mairead pushed open the door. Dust danced in shafts of dusty light. The interior was a clockwork labyrinth. Gears, mirrors, and glowing stones turning in slow rhythm. Lanterns hung from every rafter, each cradling a sleeping flame. At the tower's center stood a forge, cold now, but clearly once alive with celestial fire. A man hunched beside it, or what remained of one. His face was masked in soot and ash, his eyes gleaming with embers. He turned slowly. "You woke the forest," he said, voice echoing like hammer on steel. "I rekindled the lights." He studied her. "Then you are the Flamebearer. And he gestured toward the forge. "I am its first keeper. I forged the Nemri light, fed it with truth, bound it in glass. But the forest forgot me, and so did the flames." Mairead stepped closer. "Do you wish to remember again?" He said nothing, but he held out a small lantern, unfinished, its crystal shell dull and waiting. "I made this for the final path," he whispered, "but I never walked it." Mairead took it gently. She would walk it now, with the unfinished lantern tucked in her satchel and the forge light's memory heavy in her hands. Mairead left the Lantern Maker's Tower and followed a trail that led ever upward. The forest thinned into wind-blown heather, and soon she stood at the edge of a ravine so deep it seemed to split the world. Across it stretched a narrow bridge, made not of wood or stone, but of root and starlight. The Sky Root Bridge. "This wasn't here before," Mairead whispered. "It appears only when the flame is true," Vesper replied, perched solemnly on her shoulder. Each step onto the bridge was a quiet promise. The roots beneath her feet glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Below, the ravine breathed mist and shadow. Somewhere far beneath, a creature murmured in its sleep, a sound like grinding stone and distant thunder. Halfway across, the mist thickened. From it rose a figure, familiar, broken. It was her father, or a memory of him. He looked just as he had the night he vanished, cloak damp with rain, eyes filled with fear and fierce love. "Mairead," he said, reaching out, "you don't have to finish this." Her hand trembled on the lantern. "I do," she whispered, "because you couldn't." The illusion flickered, faded, the bridge shuddered, but held, and Mairead walked on. At the far end, the roots parted to reveal a clearing ringed in standing stones, each carved with names worn nearly smooth by time. The place was silent, waiting. She raised the unfinished lantern, and the final test began. Standing stones loomed like sentinels, each inscribed with a name barely visible beneath lichen and age. As Mairead stepped into the circle, her lantern began to flicker. Not from fear or failure, but as if recognizing old friends. Vesper leapt to one of the stones, his tail twitching. "These are the Flamebearers who came before. This is where their journeys ended." "And mine begins," Mairead said softly. In the center of the circle lay a small, flat altar of obsidian. She placed the unfinished lantern atop it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the forest breathed in. A wind swept through the glade, rustling leaves and stirring the hair at Mairead's neck. One by one, the stones lit with spectral fire, names glowing softly, each light whispering a story into the wind. She heard them all. Leora the kind, who lit the first flame with a single drop of dawn. Ethan of the Vale, who faced the Hollow King and sang him to stillness. Silane of the Northmere Isles, who walked the ocean's edge to bring the light home. And her mother, Elaine of Grimglen, whose name burned brightest of all. Mairead's hands hovered over the unfinished lantern. The flames from the stones leaned toward it, weaving themselves together, memory fusing with intention. The lantern kindled, not just with fire, but with legacy. A soft chime rang out, high and clear, and the air grew still. When Mairead turned, a new stone had appeared, her name freshly carved. Not an end, but a beginning. Past the circle of standing stones lay a grove where no birds sang and no breeze stirred. It was still as a forgotten dream, and every tree stood mirrored in the water that pooled between their roots. The Mirror Grove. This place was hidden, even from the Flamebearers, Vesper whispered. His third eye blinked slowly. It shows not the world, but the self. Mairead stepped forward, the surface of the water undisturbed beneath her boots. Every reflection shone true, except her own. Where she should have seen herself, she saw a shadowed version. Eyes hollow, lantern dark. A Mairead who had never returned to Elderholt, who had let the forest rot, who had become another whisper. She flinched. The shadow moved closer. "You could leave," it said, voice soft and bitter. "Let the light fade. Let the past stay buried. You owe them nothing." "I owe them everything," Mairead replied. She raised the Flamebearer's lantern. Its light cut through the grove like sunrise through fog. Her reflection cracked, first like glass, then like ice, until it shattered into smoke. The water rippled, and where her shadow had stood, a small silver blossom bloomed. She knelt and plucked it, tucking it beside the golden flower behind her ear. Vesper purred. 2 truths, one for sorrow, one for strength. Mairead nodded and pressed forward, leaving the broken mirror behind her. The forest no longer tried to turn her back. It only watched and waited. Beyond the mirror grove, the path narrowed to a tunnel of ash trees, their bark smooth as bone, and their leaves rustling without wind. The lantern light dimmed slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of something ancient watching nearby. From the shadows of a hollow stump, a figure emerged. It was no taller than Mairead's knee, shaped of charred wood and glowing coals. Its eyes were twin sparks, and it carried a crooked staff topped with a curled flame. An emberling. Few had seen one and lived to recall it. "You carry the Keeper's fire," it said, tilting its head. "But fire is not always friend. Answer my riddle and pass. Fail and become cinder." Mairead stood tall. "Ask it." The emberling twirled its staff, for flame flickered into a shape. First a tree, then a hand, then a heart. "I am taken from the tongue, but never spoken," it said. "I live in fire, but die in flame. I guide without eyes and bind without rope. What am I?" Mairead frowned, thinking. Taken from the tongue. She looked at her lantern, then at Vesper. "A promise," she said. The emberling paused. Its eyes flared. Then it laughed, a sound like crackling kindling. "Well answered, Flamebearer. The forest remembers your truth." It stepped aside, and the path behind it brightened, lined with flickering wisps of old firelight. Before vanishing into the stump, the emberling turned. "Not all riddles are spoken," it said. "Some walk beside you, waiting to be known." Then it was gone. Mairead stepped onward. The heart of the forest was near, and so was its secret. The path sloped downward now, winding into the roots of the forest itself. The air turned warm and thick, rich with the scent of damp earth and sap. Lanterns no longer hung from branches. They grew from them, pulsing gently like fireflies caught in amber. Vesper's ears flattened. "We're close to something old," he murmured. "Older than the Flamebearers. Older than memory." At the end of the descent stood a vast door set into the base of a titanic tree, so wide its bark curved beyond sight. The door was shaped like a flame, and in its center, a single socket wakered. Mairead reached for the lantern on her hip. As she lifted it, the flame flickered with sudden intensity, casting shadows that formed shapes. Her mother, her childhood home, the first lantern she lit. Then the flame steadied. She pressed the lantern into the socket. The tree groaned, and the door opened. Inside was a chamber of glowing wood and drifting motes of light. The walls pulsed like the inside of a living heart. Shelves of crystal and root lined the circular room, each holding relics, old cloaks, broken staves, feathers, stones carved with runes. It was a vault, not of treasure, but of legacy. In the center, hovering above a stone pedestal, floated a small orb of fire, the first flame. It called to her, not as a burden, but as a welcome. Mairead stepped forward. The whispers faded. All was still. She reached out her hand, and the flame did not burn. It nestled into her palm like a sleeping bird. As the first flame settled into her hand, warmth surged through Mairead. Not heat, but memory, essence, purpose. Her breath caught as the light unfolded within her, weaving itself through every vein, every hidden scar and shadowed thought. She was not holding it. She was becoming it. Visions poured into her mind. The first Flamebearer, kneeling beneath the canopy of the newborn forest. The forging of the lanterns from dreamwood and starlight. The moment the whispering wood whispered its name for the first time, Éowyn. She gasped. That's its true name, she whispered. Vesper's third eye glowed. Names are power. You've been given trust beyond bloodlines now. The chamber trembled gently, like a great beast exhaling in sleep. The relics on the shelves glimmered, as if acknowledging her presence. Mairead stepped back, and the first flame, still nestled in her hand, shimmered into a smaller, flickering mote, and settled into the lantern once more. But it felt different now, lighter, wiser, complete. She turned toward the door, which remained open. The forest will change, she said. Vesper nodded, and it will remember who helped it. As they left the Heartwood Vault, Mairead felt the air shift around her. Trees straightened, paths uncurled. Light followed her, not just from her lantern, but from the forest itself. For the first time in a generation, the whispering wood sang. And Mairead knew the song by heart. The song of the forest followed Mairead as she stepped beyond the Heartwood Vault. It wasn't music in the usual sense. No melody, no tune, but a feeling, a quiet harmony humming in the roots and leaves, carried on the light breeze like a promise. But something waited ahead. At the edge of the clearing, she found a stone pedestal she hadn't noticed before. Upon it rested an old bell, iron, weathered, and silent. Vesper stiffened beside her. "The bell of return," he murmured. "It hasn't rung since your mother vanished." Mairead approached, her flame casting long golden rays across the moss. In the stone, an inscription had appeared, words etched in curling script. To call what is lost, to wake what is sleeping, to welcome what returns. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out. The bell was cold to the touch. Heavy, real. She struck it once. The sound was low and deep, more felt than heard. It rippled outward, threading through the air like a slow heartbeat. The forest stilled in reverence. And then, from the trees, they came. One by one, figures emerged from the shadows. Faces familiar and forgotten. People the forest had claimed or hidden. The faceless guide, now whole. The mirror-eyed children, now bright-eyed and laughing. And Mairead's heart stopped. Her parents stood at the edge of the light. Her mother, the last true Flamebearer. Her father, still humming the lullaby Mairead had long since forgotten. Tears streamed freely down her face. The bell of return had worked. And for a moment, the past stood with the present. Mairead stood frozen, the silence filled only by the warmth of the flame and the presence of those she thought lost forever. Her mother stepped forward first, the lantern light dancing in her eyes. "You kept the flame," she said softly. "I followed your path," Mairead replied, voice thick with tears. Her father wrapped her in an embrace that smelled of wood smoke and old parchment. "You lit the way for all of us." Behind them, the returned souls began to fade, not from sorrow, but with peace. They had been found, freed, remembered. Her parents lingered a moment longer. "The forest is whole again," her mother whispered. "You did what none before could." "I was afraid," Mairead said, "that I wouldn't be enough. You were more than enough, and now you must live." With a final smile, they too dissolved into golden motes, carried into the branches above. Mairead stood in the hush, the flame in her lantern burning steady and calm. Vesper rubbed against her leg, blinking his 3 eyes slowly. "You're the keeper now." She nodded. "Yes, I am." She walked the long path home beneath a forest no longer whispering threats, but secrets, stories, laughter. The lanterns burned bright, not just with fire, but with memory. Helder Holt welcomed her with quiet reverence. No parades, no fanfare, only lanterns in every window, and the smell of bread, soup, and something warm and right. That night, Mairead returned to her crooked cottage by the Grimglen Moors. Smoke curled from the chimney once more. She hung the Flamebearer's lantern by the hearth, where it would always burn. Vesper curled beside the fire, and for once said nothing. Outside, the wind passed softly through the trees, no longer whispering warnings, only stories. And inside, by the steady pulse of the lantern light, Mairead began to write.